3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Star Hurley is a third-generation family business operating from Jenkinstown, County Kilkenny. Star Hurley produce handmade hurls made to the wishes of each individual. They can be contacted by phone on 083 434 775 or on social media via Facebook or Instagram. Hello and welcome to the Backdoor GAA Podcast. Delighted to be joined by Down Senior Hurling Manager Ronan Sheehan. Firstly, Ronan, in 2020, a great year for Down Hurling. How do you reflect on it all now, looking back?
Yeah, look, it's I suppose the end was slightly disappointing in terms of losing the final in some ways, in terms of everything else had gone perfectly up until then. But overall, fantastic year. I suppose we had the disruption of kind of waiting for a league final. We were actually due to play the league final almost 48 hours before it was called off. That getting called off, left a kind of big hole for us. Heading into kind of then, probably the lockdown and then the kind of period with the clubs, etc. We were extremely lucky, Paul, to be honest, that we came back from the clubs on the back of a fantastic club championship. So we had a club championship in Down, which was round robin, and the teams all got kind of 7-8 games. And even the kind of fact that the final went to a replay, people were kind of saying to me, was that going to impact on our preparations for the National League final, which was only going to be 4 weeks later? And I said no. I said because it's better the lads are playing a competitive match than necessarily coming in and kind of just having a couple of training sessions, etc. And you could see that sharpness with the lads when they came back. So a lot of the credit there goes to the clubs for the way that the championship was so competitive and that they had the lads in such good shape. And we came back and probably played the best hurling we did almost against Derry in the league final, winning that league final in Armagh. And that actually was probably the biggest success for us because we've been looking to get out of that division for a number of years. If we got beaten this year, it would have been our fourth final to get beaten in 6 years in Division 2B. And we've been in there for about 7 or 8 years. And believe it or not, we've kind of not won a National League title in almost 20 years. So when we went up we beat Westmeath back in about 2004, maybe, 2003, 2004 to go up into Division 1, which is fantastic. Stayed there for a few years, and then we've been steadily coming back down again. Lost our kind of Division 2A status I think it's about 2003, and I've been struggling, Paul, to get up ever since then. So this was a massive step for us, the National League, and I know a lot of people will focus in on the Offaly game and because of the notoriety of that. But our big match was Derry and getting up into Division 2A because it gives us kind of 5 really good games against the likes of Offaly, against Kerry, against Meath, Carlow, the types of counties that we would see ourselves being in the same bracket as, if you know what I mean. And given an opportunity to kind of build from there, because about 75-80% of my panel would be under 23, so we're very keen to kind of get up into Division 2A, I suppose, learn our trade, consolidate and build from there again. A lot of our lads would have hurled against, the Thomas O'Connors, the kind of Shane Conways, etc. from Kerry, and in the B championships down through the years, and had a number of great games in them. So we've kind of watched Kerry's, I suppose, progress with a bit of envy and kind of said, if we can get up here, we can be, we can do the same. We've always played against Carlow in challenge matches, both at underage and at senior level. So we kind of see ourselves at a par with some of those counties. This is our chance to prove that. So, getting up in the Division 2A was massive. Unfortunately, no crowds probably. And that's a bit of a disappointment because we were looking to kind of build on that with the schools links and things like that because they're important for counties like Down. But the National League win was fantastic and it gave us a great kind of boost going into the championship and into Christie Ring. Getting to play, had a tough victory against Derry, to be fair, in the first round in Ballycran. Conditions were tough. Derry are a very good team as well. And I think probably don't get the credit for the quality of the hurlers they have. The likes of Cormac O'Doherty, Brian Og McGilligan, the Kelly brothers that are very good hurlers. Probably just people don't know them because they don't see them, if that makes sense. And then of course we played Offaly in that game in Park Esther, which is very special, I suppose, from my own perspective, given Park Esther is my home club in terms of Newry Shamrocks, and to get the victory that day, Down's first kind of championship victory against Offaly. And I suppose the nature of the victory, of course, was fantastic as well in terms of it going to penalties and winning the penalty shootout, and then getting to play in the Christie Ring final. As I said, clearly disappointing to lose that. But you need to look at it in the fact of, if you'd asked any one of the teams who were in the Christie Ring this year, would they have taken getting to the final and getting promoted? Yes, they would, because I suppose in many ways people expected Offaly to win the Christie Ring, including the other teams that were in it. Now, none of us were thrown in the white towel. Clearly we weren't, given that we ended up beating them. But there was that bit of recognition that it was going to be kind of tough to win with Offaly there, and that the promotion was the main kind of how would you say, statement that you could make. And clearly we did that. And to get to play in Croke Park the same weekend as Bloody Sunday and the anniversary of Bloody Sunday was very special for a number of the people in the panel, particularly families like my own or the McCrickards or stuff, who would have very close connections to those revolutionary years, etc. So that was massive for the club, for the county, and also just massive for the players on a personal level. You don't buy experience finals. You have to earn that experience, and I think to get there 2 years in a row, while it's disappointing, I think will stand to those lads as they move forward. And as I said, they're very young, and while I won't be there to see them absolutely get to the end of their potential in 2 years' time, I think events like this year will definitely stand to that group of players.
Being involved in, I suppose, one of the first penalty shootouts against Offaly, what did you make of all that, being on the sideline watching?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Again, I suppose it comes back to most of the wee chat having before we started the recording. In some ways, these are things that you can't really plan for. In ways, the players, this is where you have to trust players, and the players become the ones that actually follow through the action, as opposed to anything the manager can do. You pick your 5 kind of players and you just trust them that they're the best 5 you can pick. And you sometimes, certainly for me, when we picked our 5, I picked 5 players that I felt were probably in some ways not just our best strikers of the ball, but also able to handle the pressure. So there was there's a bit of kind of question mark, why didn't we pick Owen Sands, who'd be our top scorer? And I just felt that the 5 guys that I had were all good strikers. CT, who's the fullback, was one of those. But you see that lads will always be messing about in training, if that makes sense, and hitting penalties and stuff. And from, in many ways, with a penalty, it's about having the confidence to strike it, and also striking it hard, and having the striking it true. And certainly CT had that ability. And we wanted to try and keep, believe it or not, 1 or 2 of our better penalty takers back for what we thought might go to sudden death, because we had quite a bit of confidence that Stephen would save at least 1 or 2 penalties. He's a fantastic penalty saver. He saved 2 in the club championship as well. Last year against Derry, he saved 1 as well. In the National League, etc. So he's a real record of saving. So I knew I knew that we'd probably save at least 1 or 2, and that we may well go to sudden death. So that's why we held Owen back. I didn't expect us to miss our first 2, that's for sure. And you kind of at that stage, it's in many ways is in the laps of the gods, and I was kind of, after the kind of after CT had scored and brought it level, I remember kind of Stephen going into goals to face the last Offaly penalty, and I actually turned my back and I walked away a wee bit down towards the far end of the pitch. And I I looked up towards the heavens and said a prayer to my late father, who I lost a couple of years ago, who was a fierce hurling man, was a county hurling board chairman here, etc. And I didn't even see the either the save or the penalty going into the net actually until afterwards, because I had my back turned. So in many ways, as I said, it's down to players at that stage. And I suppose, Paul, I say a lot of times to my own lads when I'm coaching them, we're coming up to big games, that you can put all of the kind of plans in place, you can put all of the kind of tactics in place and structures in place and tactical plays, but in many ways, once players walk past and walk onto that white line or past that white line, an awful lot of the responsibility, an awful lot of the ability to, I suppose, influence the game sits with them. Yeah, you can make substitutions and you can make kind of, moves around the field, but actually that's where it becomes so important with a group of players, that you create leaders, that you create people that think for themselves, that can innovate. Because ultimately in a game, that'll be forced on them at some stage, and they'll have to kind of work their way out of trouble. Yeah, you can help and you can influence, but if you're at a match, now it's easier for us because we don't have the same crowd, so sometimes getting the shouts across the field, people can hear you. But ultimately, if you think about Croke Park or Thurles or Nolan Park or anywhere like that on a packed day, and you're trying to get a message across, it's virtually impossible. Like, okay, you can send across the Mayor Ferna at the moment. They're talking about getting rid of that, but even with that, if you think about a player and he's hyped up, he's in the middle of a championship battle, and somebody comes in and saying, do this or do that, realistically, your chance of them taking all of that in that 20-second kind of whispered conversation is quite limited, and again, that all comes down to if the team knows what they need to do, if they know how to react in certain circumstances, they'll work it out themselves. If you see all of the great players, you'll see the Joe Cummings or the TJs or the Pat Horgans or whoever, and you'll see them talking to their teammates all the time. You'll see them almost directing what happens on the field of play. And I think, from my own perspective, that's what I try to kind of build in my own guys. It'll take time. They've made a lot of progress in that regard. But I think, even in the game against Offaly, the last 15 minutes when it was in extra time, the players were outstanding there in terms of how they managed the game, how they kind of kept their discipline, how they didn't give away, silly kind of frees and all. We were a wee bit disappointed actually with the last free because we felt we'd done everything right and stood them up, etc. It's one of those classic examples, to be honest, where, it certainly wouldn't have been a free in the McCarthy Cup, put it that way, but look, it is what it is, and it turned out well for us in the end, so we were lucky. And I mean, look, as I always say to people, to be the first to do anything is fantastic because everybody else is following in your footsteps, so there's a wee bit of history there for the team being the first team to win a championship penalty shootout at inter-county senior level. And I suppose Stephen will always have his names in the record books as a result of that. So very fitting for a great servant of Down, and indeed a family of great servants of Down, given his father was a great keeper for many years as well.
And you mentioned there that within the Down squad, it's, I suppose, very player orientated, that you leave it to the players. When you came in at the start, was that one of your main focuses?
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose it was. Like, I'd be very lucky to be fair, in that I know an awful lot of these guys from underage. So I would have had Connor Woods and all at underage. Connor, for God, maybe 13, 14 years ago. And to be fair, they were probably the first group of Cork players, Down players that ended up getting some coaching, a level of coaching from Donald Logan, Sully, who kind of came up and did a bit of work for them, etc. And Dermot, not this year, but the year before, last year, was obviously up as a coach with us. And then the likes of Dahi Sands and that group of lads that are 22, 23, the Mark Fishers, the Rory Campbells, etc., Pierce Oak McCrickards. I've had a lot of those boys, believe it or not, since under 14 in development squads, almost the whole way through up into kind of 16s minors, etc. And I've always tried to kind of gradually build that belief in themselves that players are who win games. And maybe a bit of that comes from the fact of been involved or been so passionate about what the GPA do as well, to be fair, and the belief that, players are really what the games are about. But I do think that, if you look at any successful team, it is the players that ultimately drive things and demand standards not only of each other and themselves, but also of the manager as well. People can talk about the unfortunate situation in Cork that time with the strikes, etc. And it was unfortunate, particularly the one with Jerry McCarthy. But a lot of the root of what was happening there was players being leaders and demanding more and expecting more. And I think when I came in, there was almost this piece around, players do as they're told, and the manager dictates and the manager decides. And in some ways, that's right. The buck must stop with the manager. And, if there is a difficult decision to be made, I need to make that, and that is my job. But I tried to kind of build a culture whereby the players are willing to challenge, and they'll challenge me, not challenge me in a cheeky way or an undermining way, but they'll come and they have a small group of players that they kind of meet together, and then they come to me and they'll say, look, we think this, and this isn't going well at training, or we think that we should be doing this or whatever. And that makes them bought into what they're trying to do. It makes them kind of, personally invested in what they're trying to do. And I think ultimately, I don't know what Limerick do. I don't know what Dublin footballers do. But when you look at those individuals, when you listen to those individuals talk, it's pretty kind of easy to determine that the players drive an awful lot of what happens there, and that they demand the standards. Yep, don't get me wrong. John Kiley, fantastic manager. Paul Kinnerk, a genius from a coaching perspective. I know Desi quite well, actually, through the GPA, Desi Farr. But if you think about even the Dublin footballers, and leave aside all the stuff about the funding, etc. and all, and you focus on the fact of, how seamless it went from kind of Jim Gavin into kind of Desi, and how well that transition went. That wouldn't have happened unless the players were real leaders, and unless the players were driving a lot of what was good about both those setups, if that makes sense.
And for the progression of down hurling overall, like we've seen, you mentioned there, Jeremy O'Sullivan coming up, Donald Cusack coming up, Mick Dempsey has been around as well, coaching. Do you feel getting names like that into down doing coaching sessions is vital in the long run for down?
Yeah, and I think it's how you do it, and who the individuals are. So, if I take Dermot as an example, and I suppose I'm biased because he's a personal friend, but if I take Dermot, Dermot has always been about helping out, if that makes sense, and doing it right. It's not a matter of kind of coming up, doing a session and not being seen again, in inverted commas. Again, it's about being invested in the process and stuff. I think if you can get people who can add value and who are genuinely interested in what you're trying to do, then that makes a massive difference. And I think, if you look at kind of, Ulster hurling and what we need to do in Ulster, we've got some really, really good coaches here. Don't get me wrong. Mickey McShane, fantastic coach. Mickey McCullough, Cormac Donnelly, Ronan McWilliams, who's actually down coaching with the Kildare senior hurlers. It's not that you don't have good coaches. You do. But I think that, a different voice adds real value. And I think the other thing that they add is that kind of, I suppose, being able to give the expectation of what is required to get to the next level, if that makes sense. And kind of, I remember, when Dermot came up the first time, when he was kind of involved in the senior team, and he was just kind of saying to he was trying to position with the guys that, they have to go at 110%. And if they miss the ball at training, so what, or whatever. But if you're playing safe all the time at training, then when you have to kind of push yourself not to play safe in real life matches, it won't work, or it won't be, so it's that. I don't think there's any difference in skills. And what I mean, and I know people are going to say, really? No, but if you actually think about it, and I say this to the guys at training all the time, if we had a skills competition at training, as an example, I'd fancy myself at 48 and being fat and round to be able to compete with the rest of the boys on the field from a skills competition, because you're standing still, you're doing all of the skills still, standing or at a slow pace or anything like that, right? So could I get a number of guys who could cut the ball over the bar similar to what I could in Kilkenny? Yep, tick the box. Could I get a group of boys to hit the ball over the bar from 60 yards under no pressure? Yeah, no problem. Now the difference, of course, is could they do that at full pace under pressure? That's where the difference comes. So the difference is not necessarily, particularly not from the McDonagh, the top end of the ring to the McDonagh to the McCarthy Cup. The big differences there are the conditioning of the players and the pace at which everything is done. It's not that can somebody strike the ball on their left? Yeah, they can. But can they strike the ball on their left under pressure with a player right behind them ready to hook them? That's the difference between the McCarthy Cup player and the McDonagh Cup player and the Christy Ring player. And you'll see that as well if you break down statistically how many scores are taken in the McCarthy Cup from, let's say, 65 plus yards under pressure. Compare that to how many are taken in the McDonagh Cup, how many are taken in the Ring Cup, and you'll see that difference dropping all the time. So the pace at which the skills are done is the big difference. And I think that's where coaches coming in from, the Corks, the Kilkennys, the Limericks or whatever, can add real value, because they're not necessarily replacing the person who might be there from down or that, but they're supplementing what they're doing, or they're providing additional support. I think you always need to have somebody from within the county there, because let's be honest, we're the ones that care most about whether the team succeeds or not, or whether down hurling progresses. But if you can supplement that with somebody who can provide, I suppose, expertise, insight, a different view, and that necessity to continually increase the pace, I think that adds value.
And as well, I suppose, with the other counties in Ulster, there's been huge strides made by yourself and Antrim in 2020. But the other areas are in decline at the moment when you compare them to football, really.
You're always going to be, look, I think this year has been very successful in many ways for Ulster hurling, in terms of, you saw what Antrim have done. It's fantastic to see Antrim back up in Division 1, because, while they'd be our big rivals, don't get me wrong, the rising tide lifts all boats, and I think, for Antrim to get up into Division 1 in particular, I think is fantastic. It's just a pity there's no Casement Park and that it won't be filled with kids to watch them. But hopefully if they can, stay up for a couple of years, we'll be able to sort, the venue element of it can be resolved. But I think, the PR opportunity for Antrim hurling and Ulster hurling from having Antrim in Division 1 and having the Kilkennys or the Galways or whoever it is coming up to Belfast or Ballycastle is just fantastic. And fair play to kind of Darren and all, Gary O'Kane and Jim Close, and that, I think Antrim's a prime example of what I just talked about. If you look at kind of Darren coming up there adding real value, but of course he's surrounded by fantastic Antrim men like Gary O'Kane and kind of Jim Close and stuff like that. So you've got the kind of both sides of that. You've got the wee bit of expertise from outside, but grounded with real Antrim men and real Antrim hurling men. When you look at Antrim, Donegal had a fantastic year as well, and I would be a big, to get promotion is one thing, but to kind of, win the Nicky record, beating kind of Mayo, who had been in Division 2 for 2A for a couple of years, was a fantastic result for them. I was delighted in particular for Declan Coulter, who'd be a good friend of mine. I coached Declan previously. Declan's a fantastic hurler, would get on any hurling team in Ireland, and he played that match, in very difficult circumstances, because his late father, who passed away not long after the game, was very sick at that time. But being the Coulters, the focus was on go and play the match and finish the game and play your game of hurling, and it was fantastic to see them win, particularly for Declan. And down obviously promotion in both, but I think there's a lot of very good hurlers across Ulster. Some great hurlers in Derry. Derry would be a county that probably, if there wasn't the dual problems, Derry would would be fantastic. If they were able to have Chrissy McCaig and Brendan Rodgers and those guys playing hurling all the time, make a fantastic difference for them. Just look at how they performed against Ballyhale that day, and with Slaughtneil, and how they pushed them to their, to the pin of their collar. And then, some fantastic hurlers even in, in Armagh, the likes of kind of the Gaffneys, the McGuinnesses. You go into Tyrone, with Damien Case, if there was a transfer market, I'd be on the date, looking for him straight away. Very, very good hurler. And Mickey McShane now going in there to Tyrone, hopefully will give them another impetus there as well. But I think Ulster is a football dominated province, whether people like it or not, or whether they want to, rail against that. That is the reality. And it's very difficult when you're the second game, particularly when it comes to the young lad who's good at both. If you have a young lad who's good at both hurling and football, the reality is 9 times out of 10, unless they're from a hurling family, and as we would call them here, they'll go to the football and they'll be lost to the hurling. And when you're already working off of a small pool, that kind of loss is massive, because you're already working maybe off of 8, 9, 10 clubs. If you look at kind of the 80-20 rule, and you say, well, actually your top 20 hurlers out of 10 clubs is probably going to be no more than 30 players or whatever. If 5 or 6 of those are lost to football, it makes it quite difficult. And of course, the other flip side of that is that because you don't have as many players to pick from, players can come and go a wee bit if you don't put the right culture in place, because it's not hard to make, or it's not as hard to make, let's say, a Down panel as it is a Kilkenny panel or a Cork panel. If you think about Kilkenny there, or you think about Cork, or you think about Tipperary, and, of the 35, 40 lads on the panel, there's probably another 40 lads, and it might be another 40 lads who get on the team, but there's definitely another 40 lads who would be kind of kicking around, let's say, number 20 to number 35 on a panel. You've got that kind of real competition. While for us in Ulster, our biggest job is probably making sure that the best 30 hurlers are available, because the gap in standard between number 32 and number 62 in our best hurlers is so much greater than the gap between the best hurler in kind of Kilkenny, who's at number 32 to 62, compared to who's already on the panel. So getting all your best players out is massive. And that's a challenge when there's football, and when football is, the predominant game. And, that isn't going to change tomorrow night. It isn't going to change next week. I think where you do get an opportunity to bring some equilibrium is that I think the split season provides some opportunity for that. And I think the other bit where it is an underage, where you copy what the likes of Dublin do, where you go 1 week it's hurling, next week it's football, at whatever age group it is. And, each week kids get to play hurling or football. And for those that don't play, both, well, unfortunately they sit out a week, and that mightn't be ideal or whatever, but that's the only way to make real progress, is almost to engage in that, let's call it positive discrimination towards the dual player, to try and build up the numbers and try and build up the kind of the notoriety of one game relative to its more dominant peer.
During all these lockdowns, Team Ulster has been talked about a lot. And having Damien Casey on the podcast a few weeks ago, he was saying he'd like it, but he says for the weaker counties, them players still need to remain playing with them counties as well as Team Ulster. Are you along similar lines?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I'd be an advocate of Team Ulster, and I've talked to Damien Lawler about this. I've talked to others, and that is always the difficulty, is how do you actually work through the logistics of it? Where is the team based? Where is all that? And the last time I was talking about it, I kind of made the point. I think where I would focus it initially is not at senior level, but at underage level, right? Because if you think about it, Down are playing B championship in almost everything in terms of underage, so our minors are at B, and under 16s, etc., etc. So are Derry, so are kind of Tyrone, or whatever the case may be. And I think ultimately, if we want to really compete and we want to build a sustainable model whereby the Ulster counties are able to compete either in the McCarthy Cup, which is going to be tough for Antrim, don't get me wrong, it's great to see them there, but being playing in the McCarthy Cup and competing in the McCarthy Cup are two different things, if that makes sense, in terms of the top 6 or 8 teams and the other kind of 3 or 4 teams below that. But if you want to compete both at the McCarthy Cup and even at McDonagh Cup level, you've got to get to that level of your young hurlers all the time. And if you look at the results from Ulster minor teams over the past number of years, even if you go back, even if you look at Antrim's results or Down's results in what would be called the Tier 2 of the Leinster Minor Championship, they have been less than spectacular. We're not really competing there. So I think there's something to be said for, could we let each county play individually at Celtic Challenge level, which is the under 17 level or whatever the case may be. But if they're going to have a minor championship or whatever it is, or an under 19 championship, should we have these kind of an amalgamated Ulster team and see can we work out the logistics and see can we work out the way it would work, because if we can't do it at underage, we've no hope of doing it at senior. So we shouldn't try to go jump straight to senior and create ourselves a load of problems when actually, why would we be even having a Team Ulster debate? Well, the reason why we're having it is to see how do we develop hurling in Ulster. But actually, what's the point in developing a better senior team, in inverted commas, if you've got nothing coming behind it at the same level, so to speak? Yeah. So the way I would look at it is, can we build it at underage? Can it work at underage, either at schools level or indeed at kind of county level? And at schools level, we've shown before that similar kind of things can work. We had the Down schools in the McGean Cup, and they won the McGean Cup. We've had kind of the Dublin colleges in the Leinster Championship and things like that, and it's been successful there. Indeed in Leinster, you've now got Offaly schools, Westmeath schools. You've got more than just Dublin colleges. So I think the amalgamations can work if it's done at underage. We learn the lessons there, we iron out the problems there, and then we move on to kind of the senior. But I think our biggest challenge in Ulster hurling at the moment is, how do we raise our standards at underage? How do we get to be consistently competitive, even at that McDonagh Cup standard at underage? Because, Carlow, Westmeath, let's call them, Offaly won't thank me for saying that they're Tier 2, but let's put Offaly in there as well. Let's put Laois, those kind of, let's say, teams that are hovering in the McDonagh Cup to the bottom end of the McCarthy Cup. If you were to compare their minor teams and under 21 teams over the last 10 years to Antrim and Down, bar with 1 or 2 notable exceptions, they would be a good step ahead. And that's not sustainable if we in Down, Antrim, and indeed Derry, etc., have real ambitions of either kind of getting the McCarthy Cup like Antrim have, or indeed consolidating or building on our status in the McDonagh Cup.
Yeah, it's a hard debate and hard to know, but
yeah,
as well, going into the Joe McDonagh now in 2021,
yeah,
it's obviously not tough. It's obviously tough having no training now at the moment, and would a sole focus for you and the team probably would have been to get to the conditioning level of the other teams in the Joe McDonagh group.
Yeah, and it hasn't. Look, it's not ideal. We're very lucky in some ways in that, the guys are doing their own programs. They're on the kind of individual. We have got a couple of fantastic kind of BIA and do a company there in Belfast do our S&C. Stuart and the guys very good, and we're making good progress. But it's hard when you're not together and you can't see. You're relying on scores getting put into an app, or you're relying on kind of videos getting posted or whatever the case may be. I think we're lucky in that I would say that our base fitness isn't bad. It isn't in a bad space. The guys are very committed to improving on it. But ultimately, you won't know how far away you are until you actually play the game, if that makes sense. You can look at all the stats in the world, you can do all of your kind of comparing between your mass scores and your body fat ratios and all of that, and you can say, oh yeah, we're in a great space. But hurling is a combination of things. Primarily it's a game of skill and of courage in many ways. The other things facilitate your ability to play the game in terms of the conditioning and the fitness, etc. And you won't. My biggest concern probably is not will we be fast enough or strong enough. Probably more is our hurling going to be quick enough. And in some ways, that's very difficult to gauge until you actually get thrown into the Lions' Den and you play a few matches. And that's why last year we took great heart. We played awfully in the Q Cup last year. They beat us by 3 points there in Abbottstown. It was a great game. Now, no doubt, Michael was trying a few of his other panel, etc., the same day. But we took great confidence from that, even in terms of going into the league. And then, of course, when we played them in the Christie Ring semi-final, where we were kind of saying, we're not a million miles away here. We're definitely in the ballpark, and we can compete. And when you're in the competing space, then of course when you're competing, you've always got a chance of winning. And that's the way we've approached it. And I think our victory over Offaly this year will probably give us a lot of confidence that again we can compete in Division 2A. The big part from us, from a sideline perspective, is can we add the tactical element? Can we add the kind of gameplay element that kind of transforms us from just being competitive to being winners, and to being able to win games, And I think the other thing that will become massive this year in the National League in particular is going to be, I suppose, the draw. And what I mean by that is who gets home venue. If you think about this, if you're saying that, if I said to you, Down are playing Kerry this week, who are you going to bet on? You'd be saying, oh, well, probably Kerry or whatever. And then I say, well, actually, Kerry are coming to Ballycran. Who are you betting on now? The same way, Down are going to Killarney, in inverted commas. That's a tough journey in any circumstance. That's an incredibly tough journey when you're potentially asking lads to drive themselves, or you're putting them on 3 buses, and you're able to, you're having to stop the bus every hour and a half, because certainly our experience has been that anything more than an hour and a half with those masks on becomes very difficult for lads. And the critical piece is, if you've got 8 lads in a bus and they're all wearing masks and they're all socially distanced and all and doing all of the things right, after an hour and a half, 2 hours, it becomes a wee bit sickening. You've got to let them off the bus for 15, 20 minutes, let them walk about. So the journey, how you journey, do you stay overnight? All of those things become massive. And for us, realistically, our nearest game is Meath. So we go to Dunganny or go to Trim, I suppose that's being Trim. That's probably 2.5, 3 hours in the bus for us. Maybe a wee bit less. But you then get to Wicklow. Wicklow's at least 4 hours in the bus. Given you'll probably be down, Ockram or whatever the case may be. Carlow, not an awful lot. Carlow's in similar kind of boat, maybe 4 hours, because of course it's almost an hour and a half in a bus before you get to Newry from Portaferry, if you know what I mean. So like it's our biggest disadvantage, and indeed our advantage in some ways for the teams that have to come to us, is that our hurling area, or our traditional hurling area, is probably the very top end of the county. So I think venues will play a massive role this year, far more so than it did in any other year. And I think it definitely was a big factor this year as well. If you look at the McCarthy, if you look at the Ring and the Record and the Maher in particular, and the McDonagh, you'll probably find that almost all of the teams that almost all of the matches that were played were won by the team that was playing at home. And that wouldn't be the same in a normal year, but I think the travel element will play a big part this year.
And finally, for you, as manager down this year, what's your aims going forward?
Sure, look, it's you don't enter any competition and say we're going to do our best. You always have to say, what do we want to do at the start of the year? Where do we want to go? And you want to be ambitious. I think this year, if I'm being absolutely brutally realistic, and I generally am, it's about consolidation. It's about staying in Division 2A. I think that's absolutely our number one priority, is staying in Division 2A, because I think ultimately that gives you 5 games each year against quality opposition to build from. So that is massive for us, and that is our number one priority. I think secondly, you go into the McDonagh Cup, and I think we want to retain our status. Don't get me wrong, of course we want to retain our status, but we're actually talking, as a team there about what do we want to do in the McDonagh Cup, and we were kind of saying, look, we want to win a minimum of 2 games and see where that takes us. So we are targeting a semi-final spot, and like this year in the Christie Ring, as it showed, you get to a semi-final, it's a 1-game shootout, it's 70 minutes away, anything can happen in Championship hurling. So it's consolidation in 2A. It's kind of win those couple of matches in the McDonagh Cup and see where we go from there. But look, as I said, we've got a very young team, very young panel, and that's why kind of consolidation becomes so important. And I think if you look at kind of there's a group of counties there, Westmeath, Carlow, Leishan maybe stepped on a wee bit from that, but maybe Kerry, Antrim, ourselves pushing into that, Meath, etc., who are all, not yet at the level of the McCarthy Cup, or certainly not in, let's call it, the top 6, top 8, but who are kind of at a pretty similar standard, or a good standard, looking to push on, looking to develop. And one of the big problems, I suppose, with the way the leagues and stuff are structured is that I can tell you now that the 2 teams that will compete in the Division 2B final will be Kildare and Derry, because they're probably head and shoulders above everybody else that's in that league. And I was saying to our guys, and this has not been disrespectful to the other counties, but in that league, you were always preparing yourself for those 2 big games, whether it was Kildare or whether it was Derry or whoever the case may be. And you probably had 2 or 3 games in that league where you were able to test guys out, or maybe kind of, give lads a run or whatever. Division 2A, there's no giving the lads a run. Every game is hyper competitive, and that only pushes on the quality of the players and their development, So I think from our perspective, going back into Division 2B would be a massive retrograde step, and it's the one thing we want to absolutely avoid this year. We're confident we will. We're confident we will stay up. We're confident that we can get into the mix, and that's really what we want to do, because I think ultimately for the long-term development in down